Linda O'Donnell, I am so happy to have you here with me today at Creative. Actually, I have been looking forward to talking with you for quite a while. You are an application developer in IT for most of your life, and then you became a writer, a Fictionary Story Coach Editor, and you're also an instructor at Fictionary, and you specialize in writing romance. I remember talking with you a little while ago, and you talked about wounds and writing romance. The wound is the most important thing. And I was like, I'd never heard of that before. So promise me we're going to talk about that later. But first, I really want to know, how did you go from being in IT, which is very technical, to such a creative happy ever after?
It is quite a change to go from something that's just so focused on the black and white of life. But I always wanted to be a writer. Even a lot of people say that when you talk, oh, I've always wanted to write a book, and I can remember even as a child that I was fascinated with stories, fascinated with characters. Even back then, I was really drawn to the books that focused on a character's development. But then when I got to college, I'm going to be a writer. And my parents were like, we're not so sure that's the best plan for you. You should do something that's maybe a little more lucrative. And I was always really good at math. So I thought, okay, fine, I'll do the IT. But the whole time that I was in IT, even though I had a very successful career and I enjoyed it, I always wanted to write. I have a book that I bought decades ago that's how to write a breakout novel. And I still have that book because I knew that someday I wanted to be a writer.
Where did the switch happen and why?
Well, actually, I got sick. I had an illness that I couldn't work anymore. And I took a number of years to focus on getting my health back. And as I did, I had the opportunity to just start reading. And then I started reading craft books. And I thought, you know what? You have this opportunity. You have the time. You're not being interrupted by corporate America. It is time to see what you can do. So I started dabbling in writing. And I didn't really know what I was doing at first, I will admit. You can read craft books till you go crazy. You have to have something that really, to me, every person has that one thing that's going to finally light up that inner light bulb for them.
I want to talk about your novel. Can you tell me more about it?
My premise is 6 women from a small town and 6 celebrities of some kind. And the first one behind the scenes is a movie star. My protagonist has some pretty deep wounds from childhood. She has serious trust issues. She really doesn't like movie stars, any kind of celebrities really, because of what happened in her past. She comes home to her small town to talk to her dad about something and finds a strange man in the house. Turns out to be a movie star who's renting the house while they're on a movie shoot. And of course, I use all the tropey stuff. I have her have a little skiing accident, so she can't really get out on her own because she's got a sprained ankle. And we've got the traditional blizzard that hits and traps them for a few days. And every story needs that kind of forced proximity, so you give your characters a chance to get to know each other. But I made her pretty layered with a lot of distrust. It's important when you have a character who's really wounded to show them in a way that they're not unlikable. They may be lashing out because of those wounds, but your readers have to empathize with your character or they're not going to read your book. And if they're too unlikable, then people are not going to relate to them. And so when I first started writing her, she came off pretty bristly and I had to soften her up. Initially, I show her with her friends and I show her in her own element, and she's kind and she's funny and she's caring. And then as soon as she meets that movie star, ooh, the fangs come out. I didn't make her as bad as I had in earlier drafts because I realized she's going to be a little bit too unlikable. So those are things to consider, because as soon as you can get a reader to empathize, relate to your character, then you've got them. They're going to keep. And so I had to apply that lesson to myself. And I think that I've captured her appropriately. And of course, it has a happy ending. And then the next books that follow are all different types of celebrities. So the next one is a rock star. The third one's a hockey player. The fourth one is a celebrity chef. The fifth one is a Hollywood director. And the sixth one, hopefully I will stick with this by the time I get to the sixth one, but I'm thinking he's going to be a world-renowned meteorologist. It's fun because you look at wounds and you figure out what would be the worst person that I could try to match them up with. And that's exactly what I have done in this first book. Knowing that she's got a problem with celebrities because of something that happened with her mother, what do? I throw her in with a movie star. So that'll give her lots of conflict. I'm hoping to have the book out by, say, June 1st.
That's fantastic. I'm looking forward to all of them, but maybe as a Canadian, the hockey player one. When you're using Fictionary, how does it work so that when you're creating the story, you can see the plot unfolding? I'd like to understand, how would I use that software to figure out how I'm going to design my story?
Yeah, you've got a few steps that you need to take before you get started. And one of them is to kind of have a clear idea of what you think your story is about. First of all, who is it about? And being a romance writer, we focus on a protagonist who has some kind of wound, a flaw, a misconception. And that's where it all starts. But what's interesting is that when you first get started, you might be thinking, oh, I want to have a story where the protagonist runs into some stranger at the airport and their flight gets canceled and then they end up driving across country together. And that doesn't really tell us much about what their wound is. What do they need to overcome? We've got more of an external vehicle going on here now that we're focused on, oh, the flight got canceled and I've got to drive across the country. And so there's two different pieces to most romances where you've got this character who's got something to overcome, and a lot of times they don't even know they have something to overcome. If you think about Pride and Prejudice, for instance, one of my all-time favorites, Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth both are prejudiced, both have pride, and they don't even realize it. Their whole worldview is facing out. They do not look at themselves and say, oh, I really need to overcome this. It's not until the story starts to unfold that they kind of get an idea of, oh my gosh, I have been acting in the very way that I have accused that other person. And so when people start with Fictionary, we want them to have an idea of who their protagonist is and what goal they're chasing. And a lot of times when you're in those early stages, especially with a romance, you're not really thinking about what the wound might be. You're thinking more about what's the premise of the story? What are they chasing not related to that wound? Like, do I need to get this big promotion? Do I need to save the family farm? Do I need to go and help my dad save my dad's vet practice? It's some kind of external physical goal that they can chase. So when you get into Fictionary is going to prompt you to say, okay, who's your protagonist and what do they need to do? In that early stage, you're probably thinking more about whatever that physical thing is that they're chasing. But then once you start writing, it'll come to you like, oh, they've got this thing internally that they need to overcome. And once they get that, that's what gets to be really fun. I love the character development part. And in romance, that's just so key because readers do expect to see a character that they can identify with because they're not perfect. They've got something they need to overcome, just like all of us do. And that's why romance appeals to so many people, because they see this character. They can't find love, the thing that we all want, and they can't get that until they overcome this flaw, this wound they have.
Let's go back to your example of the protagonist's flight being cancelled, and then they have to drive across the country with this person who becomes the love interest. Could you give us an example of what that wound could be and how that would weave into the story? Because it's really fascinating what you're talking about, and I think it would be so helpful with some kind of example we can grab onto.
It's very important when you think about what the wound is, that it's something that can work together with that goal, that external thing that they're chasing. What if you have a character who's been dumped, maybe got jilted at the altar, and so they just really struggle with trust issues. And so that's their wound. They just felt so betrayed that they can't trust. So then we put them together with this person who's going to get them to this destination. Oh, I have to be there because I have to give a presentation to save my job. So now all of a sudden she has to trust this person to help her get there. So it's like head on facing the very thing that she's afraid of. And the thing with romance is it's very tropey. We lean into tropes like the enemies to lovers trope, or the friends to lovers trope, or the grumpy sunshine trope where one of the characters is just super closed off and guarded. And it's all tied into how do we exploit that inner flaw by using this pre-tried and true situation that we put people in. But when you can tie those two pieces together and make it so that whatever she's chasing, she needs the help of somebody who is going to challenge that wound. At times, going to help her get healing, and at times it's going to reveal things that maybe kind of rip that wound open a little bit. And so you want both of those over the course of the story. But keeping that wound in mind, you can tie other events together that will absolutely showcase that wound and how it starts out and how it maybe even comes to a head at some point in the story. And then as the protagonist starts to have their epiphany about, oh man, I really need to change, then we start to see them settling into the person that we know they can be, healthy and liking themselves and liking the world and being ready to embark in a committed relationship. So it's really fun for me to see how to peel back those layers on these protagonists who have the wounds, because a lot of times, again, they do not even know they have them. They've put up a wall, and even within their own head, I'm bulletproof. Nobody knows what's going on inside me until this person and these events start revealing those things very gradually over the course of the story.
If a person were to forego finding a wound to exploit and have them move through as part of the storyline, the story doesn't really work then.
Yeah, they really need to have something that shows them changing, shows them needing change. That wound is something that's going to keep them from being able to embrace happily ever after moment, as we call it. So if you think about somebody not trusting, how can they have a healthy relationship where they could be married or engaged or even just committed to somebody? You can't have that without trust. You can't have it if you're still hurting about all this stuff that's happened to you in the past. I'm not saying that love makes them perfect, because love does not cure it all. The character still has to go through a lot of self-examination and determine what kind of things they need. Because like I say, at the beginning, they don't even know that they have this wound or this flaw. And then this other plot, this subplot, that's what helps at times deepen the wound, expose that wound, but then also create opportunities for that wound to start healing. And so writers can use this to discover, well, how does that wound that this character has, how does it shape their behavior? What do they value in life? What are their priorities? What kind of things are they maybe afraid of? Do they shy away from? So that wound becomes a source of conflict, not only within themselves, but also like maybe with other people around them, especially that love interest. And it's probably the reason why they're resisting love. And it shows that they're just not ready. They've got to go through that character arc, that growth arc, in order to get to that happy ending.
Would the love interest also have a wound, or is that too much in one book?
It depends on your story. I have my book that's going to be coming out this year. I had originally written it where both characters had a fairly big arc, and I found that they were kind of competing with each other. So I made her arc the primary one, and it's pretty in-depth. She's got some pretty deep wounds. And it was really more of an external thing for the love interest. But when you think about when you start writing, and this is no matter what genre, but especially with character-driven genres that you're writing, you want to know who your character is before you start writing. Maybe the wound will come to you more as you start with the external story. You might decide that betrayal thing wasn't enough. Maybe it goes further than that. Maybe she had a really contentious relationship with her parents, or maybe her first boyfriend dumped her too. And she's just got this kind of pattern of perhaps betrayal. So when you know that, you don't have to put it on the page, but when you start, you're going to be revealing some things about your character when their ordinary life begins, and you're showing that on the page. We can see those wounds. And then when you have in a romance, the inciting incident, which is the first major plot point, we call it the meet cute. And of course, the meet cute doesn't necessarily have to be even a first time meeting, and it does not have to be cute. Sometimes we kid that it's a meet ugly because they don't like each other, or at least one of them really doesn't like the other. And it doesn't even have to be the first time they're meeting. You could have two coworkers or two neighbors or two people who've been friends for a long time, and then something happens in this scene that causes them to now get thrown onto a path of possible romantic relationship. Something happens that makes them look at each other like, oh, maybe we aren't just friends. Now there's a level of attraction that goes beyond that. So it doesn't have to just be two people meeting, like the example that I gave with the meeting at the airport when the flight gets canceled. That is a definite meeting for the first time, but it doesn't have to be that way. It's just whatever you do at the beginning of your romance story is you're taking these two people and you are setting them on a path together where eventually they will come to the end and find love.
If you go from the inciting incident towards plot point one, and then middle, and plot point two, and then the climax, if you keep it simple, you can see if it's following the arc appropriately or not. So while writing a romance, how would that wound progress through that arc? Let's say it's trust issues. Where would they be mentally once they get to plot point two? Where are they mentally at plot point one? I'm trying to get a feel for that, because if a person's just thinking of writing a romance, this happens, that happens, oh, now they're in love. There's also this whole wound storyline that's going on. That's the backbone of the story in a sense. And I think some writers who haven't been exposed to this before will maybe wonder, how do I incorporate that into the story arc? Do you have any ideas how to do that?
I think that Fictionary really lends itself well to developing that, because it gives you those 5 story arc scenes or plot points or major beats, whatever you like to call them, that help give you a natural progression in your story. What happens before the inciting incident? What did their life look like before they met that person? And then what kind of reaction do they have to meeting that person? Are they turned on? Are they thinking, wow, this guy's really great? Are they, oh, anybody but him? I'm completely off of love for now, whatever. So that inciting incident is where you give your characters the opportunity to meet. And then, of course, forced proximity is something that really almost every romance needs. There's a few that you might see that don't have it, but for the most part, you want to come up with something. And in the example where they're going to be stuck in this car driving across country, they are stuck with each other. What this serves to do is gives an opportunity for our characters to get to know each other. And in some cases, some of the interactions are not going to be pleasant. Some of them may be very pleasant. So when we get to plot point 1, by that point, the protagonist is going, I think I'm attracted to this person. But depending on your story and the trope that you're using, your character may not be very happy about feeling that attraction. Oh, I can't stand that he's so good looking, or I can't stand that he's so sweet, and I love that he loves animals, but I don't trust anybody, or I am so focused on getting that promotion that I do not have time for love. So that at this point, even though they're acknowledging that they feel that attraction, and it is a step in the transition of the character to move forward, there's still a lot of resistance here for whatever reason. That attraction just doesn't settle with them well. So then you're going to start to see them trying to do things like trying to feel out. How do I feel about this guy? How do I feel about this relationship? What am I doing here? And as they continue to move forward, it's going to be like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or maybe 1 step forward, 2 steps back as they go through and they're trying things and seeing how they do. And when they get to the middle plot point, this is generally where you see a major shift in your story. And most romances that I encounter, this is where things start to get much more serious. Maybe it's a first kiss. Depending on the level of spice that you're writing, this might be the first love making. But it's where now they have decided, you know what? I may be afraid. Maybe I'm afraid of being hurt again. Trust issues are still there. But I've decided I'm going to dip my toes in the water and go for this and see how I do with this relationship. The thing as a writer that you need to know is at this point, it might look to your reader like, oh, look at this. They're getting together. Everything's going really well. But there's a lot of unresolved stuff. Maybe they're even starting to realize, oh, I've got this trust issue I need to work on, but they don't have all the information yet to clear that hurdle, to just wipe that mistrust out of their life. They just aren't quite there yet. So they're continuing to do things. And now we're starting to see external pressures maybe come into play, like, oh, if they finally get there and maybe they decided they're going to go on a date, but then the boss that she's got says, nope, you got to be here and put in all your time. Or maybe she loses his phone number and she's unable to talk to him and things start to just fall apart. So we've gone from this place where we thought everything was going really well, but it was really kind of a false victory. They're not ready. Not all the way where they need to be. And generally what happens is we get to that plot point 2, which some people call the dark night of the soul. And this is where we have a breakup, because a lot of times there's a misunderstanding. Maybe you hear half a conversation and you misinterpret it. You did something and I really don't trust you. And that was everything that I always was worried about with you, is that I wasn't going to be able to trust you. And so plot point 2 is almost always a breakup. But what happens now, we're at this stage where the protagonist has been through so much at this point in the story. She has interacted with him. She has made progress. She has started to peel back the layers on herself to say, oh my gosh, me not trusting him. He didn't deserve that. I got to get my act together here. And they have this epiphany. And it may not come in a single scene. It might be a couple scenes after this breakup where they're like, you know what? I really don't want to be without that person. I know I need to dig deep and figure out my issues and get over it. And then as they're moving towards the climax, now we're just seeing the culmination of all that growth that they've had over the course of the story. They realize, oh my gosh, like Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth, they don't know that they've got these things that they need to overcome. But right around this point, after this serious breakup, the relationship has just taken this real hit. That's when the protagonist starts to say, They start to do that self-reflection. And this is where they start to have that personal epiphany, like, oh my gosh, I don't trust people. And how can I ever have a meaningful relationship unless I do trust people? Maybe they find out that whatever led to the breakup wasn't really the way it was. It was mistaken identity or mistaken facts. And it really causes them to dig deep at this point. And we really need them to do that before we get to the climax, because in the climax, that's ultimately where they choose love over whatever that wound or that flaw is. And one of the characters makes that grand gesture to show that love, and they accept it. And so it's almost as if accepting that and choosing love over that wound shows the ultimate growth in their character. And it helps to prove that whatever wound they had can be healed, or maybe they were wrong. If they're carrying around this flaw of being prejudiced, it's going to go away because they've had not only the grand gesture of love, but that it's all come together with that epiphany of self-growth that happens. It's like the ultimate end to the emotional arc of the character, because they not only make this realization about themselves and go through that tremendous growth since the beginning of the story, but it also ends happily in a romance. That's a requirement for romance, to have that happy ending. And they're with that person that they love. And it doesn't have to end in marriage or even an engagement. We just know that they're going to be together. And so that happily ever after, or happy for now, is what culminates in the climax. But it's not just the finding of love. It is the character really overcoming whatever that wound or flaw or misconception that they had. And what I love about romance is that Yes, we all love the happy ending when they declare love, but for me, seeing how they've overcome all of this stuff over the course of the story is what's so satisfying. And it's almost like that's almost enough for me. But then I get the bonus of these two people being in love and declaring their commitment to each other. It's like this really nice gift that we give to the reader. Like, look at this. We're giving you this happy ending. Not only is our character healing, but they have found love. And it's just a very satisfying ending. And that's one of the reasons why romance readers keep coming back to romances, because they know no matter what you throw at these characters, no matter how bleak it looks at the end of The Dark Night of the Soul, that plot point 2 scene, the reader still knows, well, I don't know how they're going to get there, but we're going to get there and they're going to end up together. And so I think it's just a really satisfying way to make readers happy and send them off with that warm and fuzzy feeling.
It's so clear in my mind exactly what needs to happen. Do you find that some writers try to mash in other genres into a romance and then it deviates away from what a romance should be doing? Because I think there's a lot of people out there that think, oh, this is a romance, but it's actually a fantasy. And then it's a romance, and then there's this there's true romances, and then there's writing that's first a different genre, and then a romance. Can you speak to that so that people can understand how they can look at stories and see the differences between those?
It's really quite often these days to see multiple genres mashed together, so to speak. Say you have a mystery and somebody needs to solve the crime, and they end up falling in love with either one of the suspects or become the suspect, but the guy they fall in love with is the detective who's investigating the case. And the important thing is for writers to determine which genre is the main part of the story. If it is solving a crime with a romance beneath it, it's going to be mystery with a romance subplot. And that's fine. And we see romances interwoven in every genre. The important thing is that if you're going to market it with those romance components, make sure it still ends well, ends happily for the love interests. Really, any genre expectation should be met depending on what you're writing. If I'm writing a mystery and there's a crime, I better darn well get that crime solved by the end of the story. Just like in romance, we expect to see our two characters together and happy. What's interesting about using the other genres is that mystery is something that is also going to be heavily impacted by the romance that's in the story. So again, my example was you've got a detective who's investigating a murder and the protagonist, it turns out to be the main suspect. And so you've got all this instant tension and conflict built in because they have feelings for each other, but he could be the one to put her behind bars for the rest of her life. So there's a lot of forced proximity, which we love in romance because he's investigating her. So he's tailing her. He's looking to see where she's been and he's interviewing her constantly. And then maybe he finds out that she's not the killer and the killer's after her. And now he's protecting her. So we've got all this nice conflict coming up and also keeping them together. But maybe his bosses are like, no, she's the suspect. Keep your eye on her. So it keeps that tension high and maybe makes her not trust him and him not 100% sure she didn't commit the crime. It's just ripe with opportunities to throw obstacles at these two people who are attracted and feeling something for each other. I think the most important thing for writers is which part of your story is really taking front and center. Is it the mystery? Is it the fantasy? Or is it the romance? You can have one that's mainly romance and have some fantasy elements to it that cause, again, those obstacles and cause that forced proximity that we need for our characters to get to know each other. So just decide which one is front and center. Make sure you're adhering to whatever the genre guidelines are for that, but use that romance as a potential source of tension and conflict as the main story unfolds, because you can add all kinds of natural obstacles to the relationship and actually cause the relationship to cause obstacles in that main plot. If we go back to the mystery example, that detective How's he going to keep his head clear to investigate and follow up on all the clues when all he can do is think about her, and he's worried about her, and he believes in her innocence, yet he's got to do his job and find out who the real killer is, and it could be her. It's so rich with conflict because conflict is what really makes our stories interesting. And then it could be that she's had a problem with trust. Maybe she had some problem in the past with law enforcement, and so she just doesn't trust them. So she's resisting him, and he's telling her, well, you have to trust me because I'm going to take care of you and prove that you're innocent. And she's like, ooh, do I believe him or what? It's her wound. And then the relationship is also causing an obstacle. So it gives all of these nice layers to conflict that can come from other suspects and from other clues, and then their relationship itself, and then her wound. And maybe you could throw in a wound for him too. There's all kinds of ways that you can mash up these different genres and use the romance part as an additional source of conflict. And then, of course, at the end, it delivers that happy ending as we tie up all the other external goals. And so I think that they work together really, really well.
You have co-authored the book, Secrets to Writing a Romance, with the CEO of Fictionary, Christina Stanley. I have read the book and I love it. I will put it in the show notes so others can find it because it's a fantastic book. And if anybody is thinking about writing a romance or wants to bone up on writing the romance and really explore writing the wound, that will be in the book and clearly discussed step by step. So, a new book coming out, Secrets to Writing a Novel. When do you think this one's going to be coming out? And what can we expect to learn from it?
So in Secrets to Writing a Novel, we're getting into how to actually do the writing.
I'm super excited about it because it appeals to writers of all types. Some people really like to dig in and do a super detailed outline. Like, oh, I have my character, I've gone back to the 12th century, I know their entire genealogy. And then there's people who like just sit down and start writing, and their characters are speaking to them in their ear, and they don't really have a plan. And so this book will appeal to every type, whether they're super outliners or maybe what we call pantsers, where they just kind of write by the seat of their pants. They don't really have a plan. But we do try, even for those people who don't like to write with outlines, appeal to them by giving them a little bit to think about. You know, who's my protagonist? What's their goal? And what are the consequences or the stakes associated with that goal? And as long as they have that, then when they start writing, they have at least a clear idea in their mind of, okay, here's what my character is striving for. I do plan on having them either, succeed or fail in the end, and that gives them at least a little bit of structure to start from.
Great. Super. Well, I'm excited to see that when that comes out. I'll put a link in the show notes for that for any listeners who want to check it out. So, where can people find you if they're interested in learning more about what you do and the work you can give them?
Well, right now I've got two websites. One is really geared more for my editing and coaching business, and it's called The Right Bones, Write, the right bones. And then my other site is just lindaodonnell.com, and that's going to be for all of my writing, all the books that are coming, my new fiction novel that's coming out soon. So those two places are a great way to reach.
Fantastic. Well, Linda, thank you very much for joining me today on Creative Actually. It's been lovely to talk with you and learn about writing a romance and the wound. I hope to speak with you again soon.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. It's been an honor to be here with you.